We'll get started. This is kind of a final piece of Revit I was thinking we would be typically using, and it is when you get models from somebody, architect and structural engineer, and then how do you how do you kind of slice out or export information from the Revit models for use in another program, and kind of your main modes of distributing information. You'll be taking a Revit model. We're going to be exporting the different components of the building and exporting DWGs for, typically the MEP team needs DWGs. DWFs are what we use in Synchro, and we'll then reuse those DWFs again for all of our Navis backgrounds. So like Jeff and Nicole, I think you've kind of seen this. Nicole's maybe done this. Garen, I think you've done a version of this, but we'll just go through the whole process of this distributing backgrounds and information, and that'll kind of tidy up our little Revit session. So I'm just going to open up a blank Revit file, and so we just did this for the project in Iowa, so that's the project we'll use. So I right-click on this Revit links. Right-click on it and say New Link, and I browse to wherever the Revit files are. So I have an architectural and a structural. Just make sure whenever you pick a Revit file, you always select the origin to origin under this positioning option. And that'll take a second. Sorry, more than a few seconds apparently. Okay, so we've got the architects in there, and now we will link the structural engineers, just right there, change it to origin, and link that one in. So again, we're going to be isolating the different pieces of the building, and we're going to make views for every single piece, and that will be a file format that we can export. So if you recall, when you click on the house up here, it takes you to a default 3D view, which you see here. I typically in 3D views, if you type VV, it brings up this. I like to go to the annotation categories and just turn them all off in 3D. And so you see the whole both buildings combined. So this is our 3D view right here. I'm going to right-click and duplicate this view. We're going to set up our first, our first isolation. So I don't know what happened. Okay. So another little handy keyboard shortcut, if you just type the F2 key, that's how you can rename it. So this is going to be steel. So we're just going to isolate the steel. So I type VV, and under model categories, I hit all. I turn everything off. And steel, 99% of the time, is under structural framing and structural columns. It'll be a steel column or the beams and joists. And so it looks good again. We've got columns and beams and joists. There are these little pilasters down here on the bottom probably aren't steel, but this is pretty good. I think this is a good steel isolation. Okay, so we've got our steel isolated. So we're going to go to the next one. Again, I just right-click, I duplicate, I type F2, and we are going to do the structural foundations, however you want to name it. So again, I've got my steel view. When I duplicated it, it's still showing steel, so I type VV, and I want to turn off those, and I want to turn on structural foundations only. So there are all the pile caps and grade beams. Another thing to check, if you recall, we've got both the architect and the structural engineer's Revit files in here. So a lot of the time, since we're doing structural foundations, you might want to just turn off the architect's, just in case there's some miscellaneous duplicate geometry that the architect had. We were only looking at the structural engineer's model, and we were only looking at structural foundations. And 9 times out of 10, the structural engineer, it kind of looks like there's some stuff missing here. You know, these guys aren't connected. It doesn't quite look right. And just 9 times out of 10, they put some items on a wall category. So I'm going to turn on walls, and I only have the structural engineer's Revit model on. So that looks better, right? So we've got those walls came in. So I think our foundation looks good. So we'll just keep cruising on through. I hit duplicate, creates a copy. I hit F2. We're going to call this structural floors. This one is usually duplicated. The architect and the structural engineer usually have the same floors, but typically the architect's floors are a little more accurate. So I just turned on floors. As you can see, I think I must also have walls on. Oh yeah, so I forgot to turn off walls. I turn off walls, and there's our floor 1 and 2. So we're doing fine. I'll keep cruising through. So now let's do architectural walls. So A-wall. So I have to turn on the architect's model. I'll turn off the structural engineers, turn off floors, and turn on walls. So now this should be architectural walls. So we've got a little bit of space junk out here. These guys out here probably aren't, you know, just something they were modeling off in space to then reuse. So we want to turn that off because we want clean exports for everyone to use. So if you recall, in linked models, you hover over an object, press the tab key, and that then allows you to select it. So you right-click and you say hide that element. So hover, tab, select, hover, tab, select. So if I hold down Control, I can select multiple items. So I hover, tab, hold down Control, and left-click. So it's a little bit manual, but we'll be able to hide all of these guys at the same time. So hover, hold down Control, left-click. One last item. So these are all the guys I want to hide. So I right-click, and I hide those elements. So we've got a pretty clean export for architectural walls. What you see, though, is you have a bunch of interior walls, and typically, you know, I recommend that you separate interior and exterior walls. It'll help you out in Navisworks when you do clash detection, and also in Synchro, too, because usually you've got good detail for scheduling the exterior walls and these tilt panels, but maybe they haven't really detailed out the interior walls, so maybe you don't want to see them. So in Revit, so 9 times out of 10, again, these walls are given an interior function. So if I hover over this guy, press tab, and select it, it tells me that it's a basic wall, interior, and it gives me the specs of the wall. But what you'll see, where is it? There usually is a function. Hang on one second. Okay, so right here, this function right here, it's given an interior. So Revit has some standards out of the box: interior, exterior, demolition, other things, and architects are pretty good at identifying what type of a wall it is. So we can filter on that. So basically, I want to turn off. So I type V. I go to filters. I want to add a filter, and because this is done so many times, Revit just built this filter in as a default. So all of you will just get this. So you can say, okay, basically it's saying, show me anything with a function of being interior. That's what that filter means. So I added it, and I want to turn off anything that has an interior function. And you can see that those walls went away. So this A-wall, so it really is exterior architectural walls. So we can then make a separate export if we want for interior walls. So I duplicated it. I type F2, A-wall underscore INT for example. So basically, I'm just going to be reversing that filter. So right now it's saying turn off anything that has an interior visibility. So I want to turn off anything that has an exterior visibility. So I want to add a filter. You say Edit New. And this selection right here is how you add a new filter. And we'll call it Exterior Wall. And so this exterior wall filter, now you're telling it, I want to apply it to walls. And then over here you get, items that you can filter on. So I'm saying function equals exterior. So now I want to add this exterior wall. I don't want it visible, and I want to get rid of that interior. So I have exterior walls not visible. So does that kind of make sense? We've got interior and exterior walls, and I manipulated it with filters. So no
Mike,
sweat, right?
Mike, when you you picked those objects that were floating out there and hid those, if you accidentally hid one that you need,
Yep. So this button right here says Reveal Hidden Elements. So you can turn that on, and there's a whole lot of stuff, but what? That actually looks kind of strange. Hang on. Let me get back to you on that, Nicole. What I would do is I would go back to my default view and maybe duplicate this view again and fix it. That's a pretty bad answer. Let me see here. This one's supposed to be it. So there. I think it's because I had that filter that was hiding anything exterior. So when you turn on this light bulb, it shows you everything that's hidden. And I could hover, press tab, select it, and I think I can say unhide.
Okay.
So if I unhide that, just gonna think for a minute, and then if I turn this off, now it's back.
Gotcha.
Okay. Okay, we've got architectural walls, foundations, floors, steel. What are we missing? Columns and ceilings. Okay, so again, ceilings will typically be in the architect's model. So I'll pick something that I did in where I had the architect's model open. Same exact mode. I just duplicate, I rename, we'll call it ceilings, type VV, make sure I've only got the architect's model open, turn on ceilings, and turn off walls. So this model doesn't really have any ceilings modeled yet, so typically you'd see a lot of them, but they don't have it. I guess another, I've got interior things turned off. So that might also be affecting, but it doesn't. They haven't modeled this yet. Okay, so let's do columns. We'll duplicate a structural view. So structural foundations. We'll call this. So I think we had columns turned on in our steel model. So let's just double check. I just want to see what we have as far as columns. So I'm going to turn on both models. Turn on columns. We already had structural columns in that previous one, so I just want to see. So this looks strange. That must mean I have walls on accident. So there aren't any architectural columns. The only columns that exist are these steel columns. So we don't need to worry about columns. So I can just delete this guy. Another one that you'll do a lot is curtain wall. It's sometimes good to separate that out. So we'll call it curtain wall. Curtain wall has 3 categories. So we'll turn off walls, and you'll see here you have panels, systems, and mullions. So all of those 3, and you want to make sure that you've got the architect's model on. So there's all the curtain wall. So again, we're just kind of walking through all the different scopes, all the different pieces. So we'll do, we haven't done windows. So I'll stop after this one. But these are all you're breaking up these overall models into all of their pieces. So turn off curtain wall and turn on windows. So there's a couple of windows here. Okay, so here's all of our pieces. So now we want to export all these. So it's pretty simple. Once you have the 3D view set up, you go up here. So again, if you remember, we want to do DWGs and then DWFs, but it's the exact same background. So now the hard part's over. So we export a CAD format, a DWG, and this, you'll see this window all the time, and it's always kind of goofy. So right now it's only saying export the current view, but we want to export several views. So you say, I want to export something that's in this session, and I want to see all the views in the model. We don't have any sheets set up, so you can just say views in the model. So there's everything. So now we can pick what we want to export to. So we got all these guys. Now you just got to tell it where to go. So I'm just going to put it in a dummy folder. So there's a couple settings here that'll get you tripped up. Right here, it is, you want to uncheck this. If there's anything XREF'd in or linked in, you don't want to include that. You just want the 3D geometry that you've been doing. And I usually say, if you switch it to short, it'll take the naming that you have already set up, so it'll be easy to identify. So I say OK, and you'll see things are going to start popping in here, those DWGs as it thinks. So we'll give it 10 seconds. So there's the first one. So another little note, I'm a big fan of naming things what they are. So 3D view -S-STL, you know, that prefix of 3D view is what Revit forces. So I usually like to just clean it up just a hair. You hit F2 and just delete those prefixes. And so these files you would post on Oxygen in, you know, a 3D backgrounds folder or some sort of a folder that you're sharing with the MEP guys, and you would email them and say, okay, CAD backgrounds have been uploaded. So now they can use all this, XREF in whatever they want, and start modeling and designing their MEP systems. One other item I kind of forgot, a grid. The grid is always very important. You know, everyone bases all of their systems off of a grid. So the grid is not a 3D item, it's a 2D item. So the easiest way to do it is to just jump into one of these default floor plans, turn everything off except the grid. So turn off the model categories, turn off all of the you know, all of the annotation categories except grid, and the architect has a grid and the structural engineer has a grid. So instead of duplicating it, just turn one of them off. I find that the structural engineer's grid is usually a little bit more accurate. So I've turned off everything except the structural engineer's grid, and you can export this as a DWG as well. So in this case, I just want this current view, that, you know, floor plan level 1, which is really just the grid. So I want to name it that way. So I can name it the structural guy's grid. And it's already showed up. So there you go. So step 1 is done. We've exported our DWGs so that the MEP team can use them. Again, you would copy paste. You know, you would upload all these to Oxygen so that everybody has access to them. So you're going to do the exact same step for DWFs. You've already set these up, no problem at all. And now you just want to make DWF backgrounds. DWF. Same thing, in session, show me all the views in the model, and then you pick the ones you want. So sometimes you sort by name just to make sure that all your 3D views go to the top. If you remember, this 3D view was our initial default 3D view that has everything. So sometimes you accidentally select this, and then you'll get a file that has everything. So these are the windows that we set up, and these are the ones that we want to export. So same thing. So you can see right here, when it's set to manual, this thing is default checked, which means it's going to combine all of our DWFs into a single DWF. So we don't want that. We want individual DWFs. So you got to do it that way. And say OK. And now these DWFs are starting to pop into place. anytime you export things out of Revit, it makes these .pcp files. I don't really know what they are. I think they're some sort of a printing batch file. You can always just get rid of them. But again, these DWFs we're going to be using internally for Synchro and Navisworks. So you clean this up.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
What if so it's a work in progress from whomever is making these files. What if there's an update to the file that they're working on? How would you treat that?
Yep. So that's why doing all of this in a linked file is the preferred way to go, because you are linking to these guys' Revit files. So let's say next week the architect sends over a new structural file. I'm sorry, the architect sends over a new architectural file. All you're going to do when you overwrite this file with the new file, and then you open your linked file, you know, all of this stuff still stays. What you'll do is you'll export a new set of DWGs and a new set of DWFs and go overwrite and update your backgrounds.
Okay.
That kind of makes sense. So
Yeah.
when you're in this mode, when you're getting Revit files and you're the person on the team that's distributing the information, it's definitely, every time there's a new Revit file, you have to go update the backgrounds and dish them out to the team. So it's once a month. You know, now that we've got this set up, it takes 10 minutes. So you open it up, you export the new backgrounds, and you update Oxygen.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but it's definitely something that it's a maintenance task that you got to stay on, because you just want to make sure that the team always has the latest and greatest of everything. So we've got a few more minutes. So that's really the end of the Revit piece, is how you isolate pieces of the models, and you're definitely going to want to export them all as pieces. You'll find the more you use Synchro, it's a lot easier to integrate the schedule when it's on pieces. Nicole and Jeff, I think you'll agree. And then the MEP guys will be extremely grateful that they don't have to load the whole freaking model to get to the underground, so that they can start their underground plumbing, that they can just use a foundation model and a grid, and they can start underground. So it's the clean, efficient way to do things. So we're going to be starting a Navisworks session, I think next week. So we won't go into detail, but what you're going to see is when you're in Navisworks, now that we have these DWFs in pieces, you can just grab them. So I'm grabbing all the DWFs. This is just kind of a teaser for what's coming. So here's our entire building. So right off the bat, I can tell we forgot to export the roof. You know, that might be important. But again, you have all these pieces. And what I like about this, instead of just taking the architect's model and exporting it to Navis, by doing it in pieces, you have better control. When you do a clash detection, you can say, show me, or run an iteration of plumbing versus steel, plumbing versus concrete. So you have better control over the clash detection. You can adjust how things look and what's transparent and what the colors are a whole lot easier when you've split it up into pieces. So that's what we'll be going through starting next week. Any questions on this last piece of Revit stuff?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, guys. This was definitely going to be, I mean, I knew this was going to be a short one. It was just kind of that last lingering set of items that we hadn't talked about, is the setup for Synchro and Navis. Okay, that's all I got.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Yep.